I'm not seeing it on Facebook.
Give it a couple of seconds.
Good morning and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH-FM, your home for community radio. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, few people make our community tick more than Pat Dillon does. And like the rest of us, she's trying to figure out how to do that in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of times like none we've known before since 100 years ago in this country. State Representative Pat Dillon represents Westville, parts of Edgewood, Upper Westville. She'll fill us in on all that. Pat,
Hill North.
Dateline New Haven.
Hill North, Dwight.
Okay. Now, Hill North, is it really north? Every time I look at the map and I see Hill North and Hill South, I always see east and west. Am I wrong? Am I looking at the map crooked?
That's what they call themselves.
I know. It was when they did the city policing districts. But anyway, Pat Dillon, welcome to Dateline New Haven. How you doing? Are you feeling well?
I'm okay. With some allergies, but I did want to thank you for inviting me on and offer my condolences to anyone who has lost a friend or a loved one to this disease. I understand we're going to be talking about COVID today.
Yes.
And the human life is what this is really about. We talk about logistics and we're worried about the economy, but this is really about trying to take care of each other and about preserving human life as much as we can.
And what are you hearing, Pat, as a state representative and as a neighbor, someone who's been in this community since well into the last century? What are you hearing from people about how this pandemic is playing out?
Well, it's difficult when people are isolated, but you mean how this is a vulnerable time right now. There's been a lot of job loss, so that on the one hand you have people who are worried about contagion or who are grieving, but you also have some people in our community who have lost their jobs.
Mm-hmm. And so as a state representative,
many of them, and they didn't get the stimulus check either.
Mm-hmm.
You just knocked me off. No? Okay.
No, you're there. So what are you hearing about as a state representative? Are your constituents calling you, emailing you? What are they asking you for help with?
I haven't been on the phone this much since I was a teenager, really, since I was in high school. And I haven't sat in one place this long either. It's really weird. People were worried because the unemployment checks hadn't gotten out. We expanded eligibility for unemployment, which we got approval from, and our congressional people did a great job. But we had to change our system. It was a whole new thing to look at gig workers and self-employed people. And our goal was really to try to get money into people's pockets as quickly as we could. We had a mammoth problem at the Department of Labor because we had an old system, and we also had to create a new system if the federal government agreed to let us take care of self-employed people. So that has slowed down our response, although it doesn't seem slow. People are working their hearts out to get this done. It was just a monsoon of people applying, and they know because a lot of people couldn't get in. So a lot of my contacts were people who were worried about, they were texting me or calling me, not so much through the state system, a little bit through the state system. When are our unemployment checks coming, or I couldn't get into the system. I keep applying. A lot of problems with small business. We have a very heavy service economy here. When they set up the program for small business, I think it was well-intentioned, but there were a lot of different kinds of businesses in the Connecticut program.
So
And
Pat, can we take one at a time? So the
Okay,
first thing you're hearing from is the unemployed, and we
right,
know they're having a hard time getting the checks. So
right.
since you've gotten those calls, what are you finding? Because I understood Department of Labor had to bring back retired employees who knew how to use a computer system from the last century. It's so outdated. What and again, as you point out, everyone's working hard. It's not like no one's trying.
No, they're
What
working.
what are you finding now? Are people getting those checks, or are they still not getting those checks from
I haven't
unemployment?
circled back yet, but I told I, it's difficult when you still have to pay your mortgage or your rent, and you still have to buy food. And I'd say, well, when it comes, it will be retroactive.
Okay.
But that isn't much comfort if you don't have a sympathetic person at the other end who's, you have to explain why you can't pay rent. So that's some of it is that distress and asking. And I've sent out some material on from the Department of Labor and different places to look into to get information.
And have the checks arrived yet, or are they still not there?
I haven't. I don't know. I mean, if you're self-employed, no, the system isn't ready till April 30th.
Oh, April 30th. Okay. And we're
Well,
talking to
that
Pat
was,
Dillon, state representative. We're talking about COVID-19. Before we get to small business, have you ever seen anything like this? And how is this different from other? You've been here for every crisis, you know. Well, how is this different from other crises?
well, on the disease side, I was involved in the AIDS epidemic. So the fear is somewhat similar, though in theory we're in a better position now because we know what the virus is. The on the economic side, it's more like the stories I heard from my grandparents about the Depression.
Mhm. Okay. And then, so Pat Dillon, you talked about how a lot of calls you get have to do with people not getting unemployment checks yet, a combination of an old system at the Department of Labor to process the great demand, but also the work you and others did to include gig workers and self-employed people in the benefits, which obviously has become a much greater part of our workforce than in the past. You said another big source of concern among your constituents, I'm one of them, is the inability for most small businesses to tap the $500 billion that was supposed to help small businesses.
No,
Federal
there's
government
two
defined them as businesses with 500 or fewer employees. They ran out of money at the Small Business Administration. The New York Times reports this morning that the vast majority of people getting this money are big businesses who had contacts or ins, and were able to navigate the system. The average person. What are you finding? Is anyone getting this money yet? The small businesses?
There are two pots. One is what the state program, which was 25 million, and a lot of entities were eligible, and then they bumped it up to 50, which turns out to have been insufficient. So that's our pot. And the other pot is the federal. And if people couldn't get into ours, I was telling them about the federal. And I learned last night the money's gone and they give it to red states and donors. I mean, it's really
Well, I went through the experience, Pat. It was completely broken. The banks couldn't handle the demand. Our bank did better than others. The SBA changed what documents they wanted while you were applying, so you had to redo it. You couldn't get a banker to deal with because they had such demand. They did everything automated. So everyone I've talked to, some of us did make it before the money ran out, but still haven't gotten the money. Others of us, most people did not make it before the money ran out because the technical challenges of dealing with the banks who have to deal with the SBA were just too great on the ground. I'm talking about sophisticated people. They just were not able to get the application approved by
So
the
that's
bank.
the federal program.
Yeah, but that's a lot more money in the state. If I remember correctly, most of those state aid was a quick $10,000. We applied, everyone else, not a single person I know ever got that money. That was supposed to be a bridge loan to keep it going. The
Right,
federal program gives you 2.5 months worth of your expenses if you agree to keep the people employed.
right.
Paycheck protection program. Have you heard of any human beings who've gotten any of this money?
No, I saw very early this morning where some of the top state, I think, that got money was Nebraska. I mean, they didn't really allow for which states were economically hit by the virus. And in fact, there appears to be an inverse relationship. But except that it looks political to me. I don't know.
Tell me
Uh,
about that. Andrew Cuomo has said that there's an argument that the federal government is not giving the aid proportionally to where either the victims are or the population are because they're blue states. Do you think that's true, or do you think it often you and I have talked about what often sounds like conspiracies just turns out to be bungling, bureaucracies unable to deal with problems? Do you feel Connecticut's getting shortchanged intentionally?
I don't know. I can't look into their hearts. You know,
Mhm.
um, I can only measure the output. And I do know that these are the same people that did a tax bill in 2017 that for the first time since the income tax was enacted, basically violated basic principles of federalism by eliminating the deductibility of certain kinds of taxes. And that was targeted very politically, and they admitted it. They wanted to drown the governments of the blue states in a bathtub. I mean, that was what they said. And they were bragging about it. John Cornyn was quoted. And I don't know how any Republican in Connecticut can defend that, but whatever. Uh, they took the money from here, and they punished people who make wages, and they rewarded people who are trust fund babies, and that an unearned income. So that sets the table for my being very skeptical when I looked very quickly, and it was about six this morning, at the states where the most money per capita went. It looked political. Can I prove that they did it that way? No. I do know that I was very proud of Chris Murphy's efforts to have some oversight. And I do know that some of that was disregarded in the signing statement. So naturally, that makes me smell a rat. But that doesn't mean that I can prove anything. I don't. All I can do is look at the output. Our
All
state
right.
needs. We got hit, and we deserve help from the government.
What specifically would you like to see come down? What form of, is it more money for the hospitals? Is it more help navigating small business loans and unemployment checks? What specifically uh, more help do you want from the federal government?
Well, I would like to look at some kind of way of making up for the revenue loss that we've sustained on the state and on the local level. More support for small business. There wasn't enough for healthcare. Our hospitals had to get rid of paying procedures and delay them so that they lost revenue, and they're caring for just an extraordinary number of people. And it started in Fairfield County. That was the hardest hit, which is kind of interesting. And then it appeared to be migrating to New Haven, which is, I think the governor calls it the COVID corridor, I-95. But I see yesterday now a new hotspot is Hartford. They may be pulling ahead of New Haven in terms of cases. So I don't know what the mode of transmission is there, but we definitely have a lot more people out of work. We have a loss of revenue. On the sales tax side, we have a loss of revenue, and on the income tax.
We're talking to State Rep Pat Dillon, who's been probably busier than ever with her colleagues in the midst of a crisis, even if they're largely quarantined. What's your day like, Pat? Walk me through a typical day as State Representative Pat Dillon amidst the pandemic.
Well, I'm on conference calls about half the day. There's been very good communication within the delegation and between the delegation and City Hall. Yesterday I was on a conference call with, and the day before yesterday I was on a conference call with my own House Democratic Caucus. I take phone calls. I return phone calls from people who text me or who they're reaching me through my personal email, my Facebook, and I didn't expect to be relying this much on Facebook, but there it is. And I would like to disengage, but it's not going to happen now.
Yeah.
So I'm returning that, and there's a couple of projects I'm interested in, and I do a lot of reading. I'm trying to make sense and formulate my own policy, and I watch Ned Lamont and I watch Andrew Cuomo.
What are you reading?
I've been reading the literature on this since January, actually, because I assumed that for me that the urgency in January was that Lunar New Year was coming. And I grew up originally in Flushing, and the parade kicks off from a corner that I know very well. My grandmother was right there. And I just assumed there would be some conversation. I thought it had the potential to be a super spreader, that particular Lunar New Year in Queens, in Flushing. So I was kind of obsessively looking at the cases because I thought it would be a real problem. The Mandarin community did cancel a couple of events, but there was still a lot of people there. But that's another feature of the cruelty here, which is kind of weird in an edible kind of way. This is, Donald Trump was born in Queens, and they're the epicenter, and he's cruel to them. He talks about nurses stealing masks, and it's so odd. And this is an anecdote that I'll just say and leave because I don't want to be that personal. When I was growing up, Donald Trump's mother was very well regarded. She was well regarded because of her philanthropy to Jamaica Hospital. She was a member of the auxiliary committee. You would see her picture at luncheons in some of the small presses. And there was a story about her showing up once unannounced in a full-length mink coat, which I think she did. She was born in poverty in Scotland, in the Hebrides, and kind of asking the administrators what they needed at Jamaica Hospital, and she would get it for them. And I think I had long since moved away that there's a wing named for the family, but it's really named for Mary Ann Trump. So it's so strange that he's punishing Queens Hospital. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me.
Pat Dillon, State Representative, 92nd District. Harry Drost, what do our listeners have to say?
Rodney Williams says, like I've been saying, the bar is too high. Although they fought for the money, they didn't have a plan for the money to reach the ground to the people that really need the help. And Bob McCormick wants to know, he says, you've been in office a long time. Will you be running for re-election?
Oh my. Okay, thanks for those questions. On Rowdy's point, Pat, I've actually been trying to help minority-owned businesses access the money, and it is impossible. I mean, it is almost statistically impossible that minority-owned businesses will get anything like more than a tiny fraction of this money, just in terms of the steps they go through and the kind of paperwork you need. And there's even a program specifically for minority-owned businesses by the state. And I'm told that almost all the applications have come, it's for female-owned or Black or Hispanic. It's run through HEDCO. And almost every application has come from a female-owned business, which is great. We want to help them. But even that one has not been succeeding. But what about Bob's asking if you're running again? Is that on your mind right now?
It's not really on my mind. My heart is not in that right now, but I set up a campaign and I started raising money, and a good friend was gravely ill, and I kind of stood back from that for a while, but yes, I am. And for myself, I usually go door to door. I've raised money online for other people, but I prefer to go out door to door, but I can't do that now. So I'm going to be doing it online.
You are running for another term.
I'm not really thinking about that right now.
But you are running for another term.
Yeah, I have a campaign committee, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that was just a question.
I really do need more information about the other program. The other question, because was that about the state or the federal? And I'd really like follow up on that, because if there's something we can do to fix it, we should.
All right, thank you, Pat. Pat, what about the fear we all had about the scenes we saw in New York, the scenes we saw in Italy, where there were not enough beds for everybody who had to go to the hospital with COVID-19, where people in hospitals had to make decisions. You get to live, you have to die, because there just aren't enough respirators. Bodies in the hallways, barely alive, dead bodies piling up in trailers. We haven't seen that yet in New Haven. We've been planning a lot, boosted up to 1,900 COVID beds at 4 locations. New Haven has some, the National Guard helped build at Southern. Yale has a facility. We have a refrigerated truck. We haven't had to use it. What's your sense of where we are on that? Are we approaching a nightmare movie scene, or did we do it right here, learning from what happened in other communities?
Well, we're in new territory, so I think we've done as well as we could, really. It's very complicated, but there are groups that we have not met. We have not reached some of the people that are the most at risk. And we have not reached some of the people in their own community. If I drive by a gas station, I might see a bunch of young guys standing around. They're not social distancing, and they're not going to listen to an earnest speech from me about it. We need to do a little bit more outreach on that. But the people that I'm worried about right now, and we need to chase, 40% of Connecticut's deaths are people in nursing homes. Okay, so it makes sense. I mean, if you're looking at this from a virus point of view and not from a voter or a politician who puts things into categories, from the virus's point of view, we're just meat, right? We're a vector for them to transmit themselves, to replicate themselves. And when we stay home, we're saying, no, I'm not going to participate in this. I am withdrawing from the chain of transmission, and I'm not going to pass this on. When you are in a congregate facility, and that's true whether you're in prison, which we have to do something about the people in prison, or your people in a nursing home, they may be different politically or legally to people, but they are in a situation where they can't distance socially, and the virus can get a foothold. So that I'm very worried about having, and I really think the governor has stepped up on this, but it's a difficult thing. On the prisons, there hasn't been as much activity, but I think we need to look at the issue of the people who are incarcerated. And one thing for sure is that they should be tested. Some of them legally are going to be coming out no matter what anybody does. And I think a lot of them may be shedding virus, but they're asymptomatic, which gets me into another topic about asymptomatics. But
right, we'll get to asymptomatic. So 2 tough policy questions. People
so
have been
I
arguing about
mentioned
the state.
prisons and nursing homes, which
Yeah.
people don't think of together. But
prisons, there have been no people don't disagree about the need to get nonviolent offenders out of the nursing homes. Just talking about testing. There has been a lot of debate about people who have violent records, the dangers of putting them back in society versus the dangers of having them stay in these petri dishes of prisons where they and the workers are getting infected. How do we make the decision? Do we let everybody out? As some people are calling for letting everybody out. Other people say that will make society unsafe. What's your view on that?
I haven't really been engaged in the debate about which kinds of offenses make you eligible or not. I'm really looking at the prison as a health system, or right now as a dangerous place. Some of those people are going to get out whether we act or not. The question is whether they get out in a week, or they could get out in June, or they get out in a year. There's still people who have had repeated exposure who are probably asymptomatic. And we need to figure out what to do with them. We can't compel them to be tested for all kinds of reasons, but we should be doing education inside maybe and outside with their families, because you have to be released to a family. And right now, the guidelines that we're working with say that we should only be testing those people with symptoms. From the get-go in China, we knew that there were some asymptomatics that were a feature of this. We just didn't know how many. In the past week, there have been 2 very important studies that are limited, but we're doing this in real time. One was the 215 women in a maternity ward. It turned out there was about a 14% prevalence of COVID. And of those women, 87% of them presented no symptoms at all. So they tested positive, which means they're shedding virus. Now in Boston, a homeless shelter, random testing, not just picking people with symptoms. Again, a dramatic number of people who are asymptomatic. So we need to also look at people who are asymptomatic. And I get that it sounds unrealistic because we're still trying to get the tests for people, for everyone else. But I would just like to argue that if we want to reduce transmission, we can't rule out the people in prison whenever they get out. And,
all right. And we're talking
also we need to focus on symptoms and the nursing homes, of course, but I think everyone's looking at that now. And we also need to be looking at asymptomatics as a very important, this is a very aggressive, efficient virus. It can transmit very, very easily. If people are asymptomatic and they have not stepped back from the chain, they don't even know that they're hurting people.
All right, Pat Dillon, State Representative from New Haven, 92nd District, talking about COVID-19 on Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, live stream at newhavenindependent.org. Before we go, I want to ask you a little more about the nursing homes, because we've heard about Regis Nursing Home, Grimes. Now they had the first reported case at the Towers. What specifically can we do once a nursing home has an outbreak? This is happening all over the country, as you know. I mean, we can criticize for sure things they haven't done right, not enough staffing, not dealing with asymptomatic, they're trying to keep people separate for both the people who work there and the elderly inside. What tools do we have that we're not using to try to limit the spread?
One of the problems that we had, and I spoke with folks who work in different nursing homes and to an administrator before the stories broke, they had no masks, nothing. They had absolutely nothing. And the workers were nervous. So were the administrators, and they didn't know how to get it. So that's going back weeks now, but that's simple. And a simple mask doesn't protect me from you, but it keeps me from doing it. They didn't even have surgical masks. There are limits to the second step, which would be because the physical layout of some of the nursing homes makes it very difficult to isolate people. So you need to work with the nursing homes to try to get some folks out of there. And we also, on the state level, I think, need to be paying attention to the discharge policies of the nursing homes. If they're discharging people who still have active disease, because some of them are receiving people from the hospitals because the hospitals want to free up capacity, we need to make sure that everyone who leaves a nursing home, if they're not, a senior, if everyone who leaves is not an active case.
Hey, before we let's go, hi, Joe, anything else from our listeners for Pat Dillon?
Rodney Williams has a comment. He says, no disrespect. Whomever runs for office in the future has to have a real plan to help our communities. We can't continue to elect the same people and get the same result. If what's going on in our country is too much for some to deal with, please allow someone else to sit in the seats.
All right, Pat Dillon, would you like to thank you for the questions, people? Pat Dillon, anything you want to say before we head out for the quote weekend, although every day kind of feels the same during this quarantine?
No, I mean, this is, as I said, this is a tough time because the people are still waiting for some kind of relief. And I think that, they're working on it in Hartford, but that's not an easy task. And so I guess the important thing is to be kind to one another. This is really all of the measurements and the logistics are really about our attempt to protect human life.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Pat Dillon, for joining us on Dateline New Haven. It's always a treat to check in with you. Thanks for the public service that you do as a state representative. And I want to thank Harry Dross, our station manager, the miracle man behind the controls. And everybody, I hope you have a safe weekend. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass, inviting you to fly free with us all weekend long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.